1944. Leyte. Rain of distant shells made the roof sigh. Inside a dark schoolroom turned aid station, the smell of sweat and antiseptic mixed with wet earth. A single campaign lantern hung by a string, its yellow cone cutting a circle on torn maps and blood-darkened bandages. Women in surrendered uniforms sat shoulder to shoulder, faces hollow, hands folded over torn armbands. A wounded sub-officer leaned on a stretcher, pistol cradled like a prayer. His breath hitched with each distant thunder. Clara held the lantern so close the light trembled on the ragged edge of the wound. Dr. Cooper's gloved fingers found a scalpel and a lone ampule glinted on the tray. "He's the enemy. He's a patient." The sub-officer's finger tightened around the grip as Cooper's blade came down and... Mercy where hate was expected. In a blackout schoolroom, a surgeon balances a scalpel and a single ampule against the lives of captive women. The lantern pools light on the wound and on a pistol. Cooper's hands move with the simple promise he made long before the war, the oath to treat the wounded, whatever uniform they wear. That quiet pledge turns a medical choice into a barrier between execution and survival. If a quiet, dangerous mercy moves you, leave a like. Tell us what you would have done in the comments, and subscribe. Leyte, November 1944. The aid station was a makeshift field hospital set in a dark schoolroom behind the beachhead, staffed by a small American surgical party and a few British nurses pulled from the convoy. Their job was simple and brutal: stop bleeding, treat shock, and send the wounded onto the ships or the next dressing station. Mortar and naval gunfire threaded the nights. Every ambulance run risked shells. Supplies were thin: a single ampule of morphine, a handful of clean bandages, too few stretchers, and even fewer hands. Triage meant sorting patients by who could still be saved first, a harsh but clear rule in a crowded room. The Geneva Convention demanded the same basic care for all wounded, regardless of uniform. The surgeons wore the oath as a tool and a shield, to relieve suffering first, to save life when possible. In that room, orders from command, shouted rumors, and raw hatred pressed in from every side. The choice fell to the team at the table: oath over orders, mercy over propaganda. A jeep rattled up to the school's steps, and men in muddied uniforms pushed a line of prisoners through the doorway. The women moved like a single slow wave, heads bowed, armbands torn, shoes wet with the same mud as the American stretcher-bearers. An escorting corporal kept his rifle trained low but ready, eyes flicking from the prisoners to the lantern and back. Clara stepped forward with a blanket and a bowl. Her voice was steady but soft. "Sit here," she said. A woman with a stitched hand obeyed without meeting anyone's face. The corporal barked, "Keep them separated." A young interpreter tried to explain, whispering, "They surrender. No trouble." The corporal snorted and kept his hand on the rifle. Cooper moved among them with quick, practiced checks: pulse at the wrist, eyelids for reactivity, the tilt of the chin to clear an airway. The wounded sub-officer lay on a trolley between two cots, his shirt dark at the stomach, fingers curled around the pistol strap. Outside, shells drummed like distant rain. A stretcher was needed for another man on the verge of going into shock, but the sub-officer's wound leaked a steady pulse over bandage. Clara watched Cooper, palms clasped around a damp cloth. "He might not make it," she said. Cooper did not answer at once. His hand hovered over a tray where a single ampule sat like a small, cruel coin. The room smelled of iodine and wet wool. Nurses moved with short, practiced motions: cut, clamp, hold, because motion mattered more than words. They called it triage, a word the team used without sentiment, the order of attention based on who could live with help. Cooper ran his fingers along a wound, felt the temperature of the skin, judged blood loss not by spectacle but by the patient's stiffness under his touch. An American private was slid in from the rear, face pale, complaining of unbearable pain. "Morphine," one nurse breathed. Clara touched the ampule as if to steady it. "There's only one left," she said. The private's eyes fluttered. "Please," he mouthed. The corporal guarding the prisoners stood watching, jaw tight. The decision to give the drug to one man over another was a quiet, brutal arithmetic that left no room for slogans. Cooper held the ampule between thumb and forefinger, feeling the weight of supply and the heavy shape of responsibility. Clara brought the lantern closer to the operating space when Cooper decided to open the sub-officer to control internal bleeding that could cause sudden collapse and sudden trigger pulls. The lantern's circle of light shook with each distant concussion, painting the room in yellow and shadow. Clara's voice cut through the noise. "If he dies now, they might be killed," she said. The corporal scoffed. "He's the enemy." Cooper kept his voice low and simple. "He's a patient." He taped a rag to the wound, fingers steady. An assistant handed him a scalpel. He made a small, clean incision, eyes locked on the pulse. There was a soft intake of breath from the women. A whispered prayer began in a language none of the medics fully understood. Cooper worked fast. Clamp, suture, pack. Each motion aimed to stop reflexes that could end the prisoners' lives. Mercy in that dark was a tactical act as much as a moral one. When the American private received the rationed morphine, his breathing eased and his grip on a photograph in his pocket loosened. He watched Cooper with a new look. Less demand, more curiosity. The sub-officer, stabilized just enough to dull the worst of his pain and blunt his reflexes, blinked and found himself alive in a room full of men who had once fought him. His fingers slackened around the pistol. Through glassy eyes, he saw a nurse with a bandage in her hands and a woman with a torn armband staring at the floor. He made a small movement and the rifle slid off his chest. A stretcher-bearer nudged it away with a boot. "No more," the interpreter said quietly. Cooper rinsed his hands in a basin, then sat for a breath as if to remember the shape of his own face. Healing interrupted rage in a way hope could not. Small acts kept the room from becoming a courtroom. Night deepened, and the schoolroom settled into a rhythm like a pulse. The scratch of pens on forms, the soft hiss of breath, the occasional cry swallowed by a nurse's palm. The women huddled beneath spare blankets, eyes hollow but alive. They murmured prayers and names, tucking hair away, smoothing a bandage as if to soothe a child. A Red Cross armband on Clara's sleeve caught the lantern light and became a small, bright promise. Two medics argued softly near the supply table when an officer from the forward command burst in, face set and voice urgent. "You can't keep treating every captured enemy," he said. "Supply lines are thin. Orders from command." Clara looked up, her fingers stained with iodine. "We treat the wounded first," she answered. "That's the oath." The officer's jaw tightened. "We need fighters at the line." The room held still, listening to the countdown of priorities, orders, survival, reputation. Rumors began to move like threads through the tents. Who had used the ampule on an enemy? Who had saved a prisoner when a patrol could have taken a weapon instead? A sergeant muttered in the mess, "They played nurse to the enemy." A medic on night watch felt eyes on him and found them not just curious but accusatory. Cooper felt the shift, too, not in the lantern light, but in the shape of his team's conversations. Some nodded in quiet approval. Others avoided him in the mornings when the shelling let them eat. Clara folded bandages with a steadiness that hid fatigue. She answered questions with short sentences. "We are medics," she said when pressed. "We do what keeps people alive." That reply carried risk, paperwork, counters, even a formal inquiry. Still, the hand that steadied a scalpel could not unmake what it had done. The following dawn brought a patrol that took statements with clipped attention. The survivors, both Allied and Japanese, were sorted into groups and readied for evacuation. The sub-officer, awake and bruised, was placed on a stretcher and covered to keep him warm. The prisoners' faces were a mix of relief and disbelief. An interpreter handed papers for signatures, and the corporal who had kept them at gunpoint now watched the lantern as it swung and blurred. He met Cooper's eyes for a moment and gave no answer to a question not asked. A young lieutenant scribbled in a log, "Extraordinary measures taken under extreme risk." The phrase would pass into a file that few would read and fewer still would understand. Cooper watched the convoy leave, the lantern's light shrinking as men and women stepped into the gray morning. After the patrol left, Clara and Cooper counted supplies again, the ampule vial empty among used dressings. Nurses stacked soiled linens, folding them tight as if to seal the night away. A junior medic, who had watched Cooper operate, came close and said, "Do you think they'll call you a traitor?" Cooper looked at the lantern, its bulb warm in his palm. "I don't decide on names," he said. "We did what kept people alive." Clara tucked the ampule's foil into a ledger as if it were a receipt for a transaction none of them wanted to account for. The room smelled of soap and iron and a small, stubborn triumph. In the quiet left behind, the team held a fragile certainty that a medical oath carried a cost, disciplinary, social, sometimes fatal. But it also kept open the possibility of more life. A day passed, and then another, and the schoolroom became a place of small, precise routines. Clara measured boiled water for tea, dropping a strip of cloth into a basin to warm aching hands. A Japanese woman with a fresh stitch at her temple folded her hair back and, without words, pressed a small scrap of cloth into Clara's palm. A token of thanks more steady than a sentence. Clara looked at it, then at the lantern and placed the scrap in the inside of her pocket as if it were a private medal. "For luck," the woman mouthed, and Clara only nodded. The exchange was quiet. It registered like a stitch that joined two torn things. The medics kept lists on scraps of paper, names, wounds, where each patient had come from. A young orderly, face still round with a boy's shape, wrote down a name in careful letters and paused when an interpreter supplied the syllables. He hesitated, then traced the letters again, as if making a promise on paper. "You think they'll survive?" he asked Cooper. "We did what we could," Cooper replied, and the answer hung simple and cold between them. There was no comfort in certainty. There was only the steady work of sutures and dressings. The oath felt less like a slogan and more like the repetition of tasks that preserved the possibility of later choices. A courier arrived, breathless, with a dispatch that smelled of oil and cigarette smoke. He brought orders about unit movements and a small bundle of fresh bandages, which the nurses received like bread. Along with the supplies came a question from the brigade surgeon, an inquiry about the non-combatant treatment of enemy prisoners, and a request for a formal report. The tone of the message was official but sharp, an implication that medical decisions could not ignore the wider needs of the line. Clara read the note aloud and folded it slowly. "They want paper," she said. Cooper clipped a small report together with hands that had just been rinsed. His notes were factual, spare. He wrote what had happened, what had been done, and why. The act of recording the night's choices felt like placing a fragile object into a crate bound for judgment. Filing a truth did not mean it would be understood. That afternoon, a group of combat medics stopped by to ask about technique. One had watched Cooper's incision and wanted to know how he controlled the bleeding with so little morphine. "Hold pressure, pack the wound. Don't cut time into hours," Cooper said, and the medic repeated the steps aloud as if learning a new prayer. The conversation turned, as it often did, to the moral half of care. "So you just save him?" the medic asked. "Even if—" Cooper looked up. "We save who we can save in front of us," he answered. His voice did not carry an argument. It carried a certainty that came from a long, thin training and the immediate need to keep hands steady. The younger medic left with the echo of that sentence and a new steadiness in his step. Rumors hardened into stories by the end of the third day. At the mess tent, men traded versions of the night. Some called the medics naive, some called them brave, and some simply called them wrong. A soldier who had lost a brother in the campaign stood and said nothing, his plate untouched. A sergeant who had arrived to check receipts watched Cooper move and mouthed the word traitor under his breath. Clara felt the coldness of those glances, the way one feels a draft through a window. She wrapped herself in extra tasks and avoided closed rooms. Yet small voices in the room, an interpreter, a stretcher bearer, spoke privately. "You did the right thing." Those quiet affirmations mattered because they were the only kind not written down. One afternoon, an American captain came with a tight face and a folder under his arm. He had heard the rumor and wanted facts. "You used morphine on an enemy when our own were in pain," he said after a brief, clipped exchange. "Explain." Cooper set down a tray and met the captain's eyes without flinching. "The enemy was a threat while in shock," he said. "He was still armed. Operating minimized that threat and kept the prisoners alive. We had to choose the immediate risk first." The captain scribbled in his folder. "Orders are orders," he muttered. "You can't decide policy in a schoolroom." Clara stepped forward. "We don't make policy," she said. "We do medicine. The oath is not a suggestion." The captain's jaw worked. He closed his folder and left with a slow, measured step that carried a warning more than an answer. The conversation would be filed. The file might be opened by someone who had never smelled iodine in a blackout room. At night, Cooper sat by the lantern and listened to the low conversation of those who were not yet sick enough for a stretcher but too wounded to stand. Men and women traded names and stories in broken speech. A Japanese woman learned to say thank you in a clipped English and repeated it until she could make the words soft. A private with a burned hand told a joke that made two nurses laugh. Laughter in the dark was a risky thing. It relieved fear, but also made the room feel, for a moment, like a place beyond war. Cooper watched them and felt the cost of each breath. His fingers traced the edge of the ampule foil he had tucked into a ledger. The oath, at night, felt like a promise that required no audience. The pressure from higher command was not purely bureaucratic. A lieutenant from logistics dropped in with a terse complaint. A patrol had reported taking back ammunition that had been left too close to the aid station. "We need discipline," he said. "You must ensure prisoners are secured." The corporal who had guarded the women stepped forward, face shadowed. He had been quiet before, but the strain of nights at the road watch had dug lines into his face. "We did what we could," he said in a low voice. "When the sub-officer went down, we were raw. We kept the weapons on them." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "And if one of them had been a spy?" he asked. Clara moved to intercept the edge in his tone. "We can control them without blood," she said. "A health station is not a firing line." The lieutenant gave a small, unconvinced scoff and left with his concern lodged like a pebble in his shoe. The room's peace was thin and could be punctured. A week later, a new convoy arrived carrying evacuees and news. One man brought word that the brigade had lost a forward position after a night assault. The news landed like a cold plate on the table. Men cursed softly, and the interpreter repeated the names of the lost. The hospital's list of wounded shifted. More stretchers were requested. Fewer men could be spared for guard duty. Cooper and Clara counted options again and found fewer. They discussed moving the prisoners to a rear dressing station at first light. "They'll need transport," Clara said, "and an escort that can keep them safe." Cooper nodded. The thought of moving them filled the room with a low, busy terror. The risk of exposure, the risk of ambush, the risk that a prisoner might bolt in panic and take a life in the chaos. Mercy required movement as much as medicine, and movement in war was always dangerous. That night, one of the Japanese women who had been quiet until then crept to the foot of Cooper's cot and placed a small strip of cloth on his blanket. Her face was shadowed, but her eyes were bright. She made a small movement with her hand and mouthed an English phrase she had practiced. "God bless." Cooper took the cloth and nodded. He could not speak her language, but he understood the gesture. A nurse nearby, watching, wiped her face with the back of her hand. The human exchanges multiplied into a soft, steady argument against the hard proclamations of command. Each small kindness became evidence in a case that had no judge but memory. A formal inquiry arrived in the shape of a pale-faced staff sergeant who had been transferred from the rear. He carried a clipboard and a neutral tone that could have been composed by a printing press. "We need statements about the use of controlled substances on enemy prisoners," he said. He asked to speak with witnesses and recorded their answers in a voice that made no impression on the record. Cooper described the order of events, Clara explained the limited supply, and the interpreter translated the prisoners' names. The sergeant's pen moved quickly. "Were you aware of any policy that would prohibit this?" he asked. Cooper answered simply, "No policy could trump an immediate threat to life." The sergeant wrote it down. The statement would travel up a ladder of men with strict uniforms and stricter ideas about discipline. For now, it lived only in ink. A young medic, who had watched Cooper's steady hands for many nights, found him later leaning against a wall, exhausted. "Do you ever regret it?" the medic whispered. Cooper did not close his eyes. Instead, he looked at the lantern's soft circle on the floor. "Regret is an argument with facts," he said. "We acted to prevent a violent death. We treated what was in front of us." The medic swallowed and repeated the words to himself like a lesson. The moment carried the weight of small, private consolation. Mercy, the medics discovered, was a series of deliberate acts that left a trace and did not erase the cost. As the days moved, the wounded began to tell their own stories in fragments. An American private who had received morphine clutched at Cooper's sleeve and said, "You gave me sight of my kid's face again." A Japanese mother pressed her palm against the glass of a window, watching soldiers move outside like shadows at work, and hummed a lullaby to a child next to her. The prisoner who had once gripped a pistol now watched the medics and, with a small, hesitant gesture, tried to offer a cigarette to one of the nurses who had tended him. She brushed it away with a small, sharp laugh. These were minor, stubborn acts of life, an offered cigarette, an unfinished song, that persisted in defiance of the loud, destructive order outside. Tension rose again when a new corporal arrived from headquarters, a man whose face was scarred and whose hands were steady with command. He had heard the rumors and watched the flow of men and supplies. "You're drawing attention," he said without preamble. "Frontline units question the decision to treat captured enemies when our own are dying." Clara felt the accusation like a cold hand across her back. She answered in a voice that was small but not folded. "We cannot pick who deserves care based on politics," she said. "We treat wounds. That is our function." The corporal tilted his head, and in his eyes there was a calculation. Report this or let it pass. He left a weight behind when he turned to go, and the room's occupants felt the press of days to come. One night, a whispered altercation broke out in the yard between two soldiers who had been drinking from a shared bottle. One accused the other of being soft for letting prisoners walk free. The words escalated until Cooper stepped outside and put himself between them, arms wide like a divider. "Not here," he said, voice low but hard. "We don't fight in this place of work." The soldiers glanced at each other, muttered, and walked away with the sort of grudging shame that comes from being stopped before a point of no return. Cooper's action was small and physical. It prevented a scene that could have dragged the aid station into violence. The medics learned that sometimes medicine's first act was to stop fighting in the room where the wounded lay. On the 10th day, as a convoy was being readied to carry wounded to the ships, a young lieutenant pulled Cooper aside. His face was drawn and he spoke in a hurried whisper. "I have orders to remove prisoners back to rear custody," he said. "There are concerns your choices are affecting morale." Cooper looked at the rows of blankets, at faces turned toward the doorway, and then at the lantern's steady glow. "We will move them safely," he said, "but I will not hand them to a patrol that will use them as bargaining chips for execution." The lieutenant's jaw clenched. Then he nodded, not in agreement, but in concession. The word spread. The prisoners would be moved under the protection of medics and a small escort. It was a compromise that kept them alive for another day. As preparations for the convoy took place, one of the Japanese women tapped Cooper on the sleeve and, using the few English words she had learned, said, "You saved me." Her voice was thin, as if the words cost her something. Cooper's throat tightened. He found himself unable to answer with a phrase that would carry meaning. He nodded instead, an awkward human gesture that conveyed the gravity of the moment more than any polished phrase. The woman bowed her head as if to an elder, then stepped back into line with the others. The convoy left at dawn, the lantern's light swinging in the window until it was a small, steady blot in the distance. The departure did not end the debate. Men at the railings watched the convoy pass and muttered. Some chiefs of companies sent curt messages that named Cooper's actions a risk to discipline. A rear commander requested a formal review. Clara and Cooper received a terse summons to give statements again, this time to officers who were less interested in medicine than in the ripple effects on unit cohesion. "Do you understand the gravity?" an officer asked, pen poised. "I understand the gravity of bleeding," Cooper answered. The officer recorded the sentence and paused, then closed his notebook. The review would be slow and bureaucratic, a thing that chewed on men's lives in silence rather than in the clarity of a court. In the weeks that followed, word arrived that some of the women had made it to a safe holding facility. A letter found its way back, scribbled in rough English and folded twice, thanking those who had tended them. Clara read it in private, her fingers tracing the shaky strokes. The letter spoke of fear and of a nurse's hand that had steadied the writing when a storm of panic threatened to erase memory. The note was small as a stone but heavy with consequence. It did not erase the cost to Cooper's reputation. Such things are seldom balanced by gratitude alone. Still, it was evidence that a choice had carried life forward. The men who had accused Cooper of treachery did not all change their minds. Some continued to whisper, and some avoided the aid station when they could. Yet there were other men who stopped by with a small, direct nod and a sandwich wrapped in oilcloth, an understated thanks that passed between men who understood the value of saved lives. A young stretcher-bearer who had seen a prisoner live because of Cooper's intervention stayed on to learn suturing. He would not become a surgeon, but he learned to hold a needle steady and to let hands do the arguing where words failed. Through it all, the medics learned to live with the knowledge that mercy made enemies among some and allies among others. Each day brought practical decisions: which wounds to dress first, how to stretch scarce supplies, when to move a patient with the risk of exposure on the road. Each was a small calculus of preservation, not a debate about ideology. Cooper's hands remained steady. Clara's armband continued to catch the lantern's light. The oath they carried was less a public proclamation than a private instruction repeated in the rhythm of their work. Attend first to the wounded. Preserve life when possible. It was a rule that would not always please those who watched from the front lines, but it kept the hospital from becoming merely an extension of the trench. Earlier, before the convoy left, a patrol burst in, faces tight, rifles ready. An officer barked, "You hand him over now." Cooper stepped between rifle and stretcher, palms open, sleeves rolled. He pressed a hand to the sub-officer's chest and offered his own arm to a nurse. "You take my blood first," he said, "not his life." Clara looked up, steady. "Today, he is a patient. My oath is to that first." Nurses began the transfusion while the room held its breath. After the convoy left, Clara tucked the empty ampule's foil into a drawer and smoothed a blood-smudged armband into a nursing fold. Faces in the mess softened or hardened. Reports noted extraordinary measures, and curiosity turned into quiet respect. Years later, a ledger entry and a faded armband would be the only public traces of that night. Strength is restraint. Civilization is a choice. If this quiet mercy moved you, leave a comment on what you would have done and subscribe for more stories of duty under fire.